Great. Thank you, Rajiv. If you don't mind, we invited a couple more people for this open discussion
Sure.
from this morning. They should all have the Zoom link already.
Let me admit them. Okay, Nate and already. Okay. And Isaac too.
All right. We're back.
All right, so let's get started here. So for the next session, it will be an open discussion for about an hour, and then followed by demos. All right, so here's some topics to discuss. Feel free to also add topics in the chat. You could discuss those ones as well. Let's get started. So Ron mentioned before that the March 2021 timeline is very close. No one has officially gone through the OSF submission process at this time. So is there any concern that we might slip that deadline? Should we move it back? Should we leave it still? Should we, how can we encourage people to submit their submissions by that deadline?
So who do we have lined up that we can actually start piloting this one? Do we have any OCP platforms, vendors who want to take this through?
So I've been a little bit hopeful, and I'm not sure if HPE is here or listening. I've had this impression, which I don't know if it's incorrect, that HPE was going to be ready to try this, and there are a few others that have indicated to me they want to try this, but I know that occasionally on Slack HPE has been mentioned, so that's the one I thought I knew. Yeah.
So around HPE, what platform is that?
Let me try and find the discussion. It's from quite some time ago.
Yeah, so I assume it is x86. So I assume on that they would depend on having the FSP blobs be redistributable.
Yeah, let's click down on it. Let's click down on that one and see what needs to be done and see if there is interest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one. It's really a hard one.
I remember there was also interest from IBM with Power in going through with the submission process.
Yeah, because they're already there.
Yeah.
They absolutely can do it.
So Reddy, so you were talking about a pilot program.
Yeah, I mean, we should, between now and, before getting the approval, if we can run it through some sort of, I mean, I'm not calling this as pilot, but just, an experiment before, just to get an idea of what does it take for us to get this through with the third-party vendor in the mix. So if we can try that flow, that will be really ideal. That's why I was asking, are there like one or two vendors who are very interested in this one? Can we start that work?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think HPE and IBM would be good candidates for the pilot program.
Yeah, so the HPE, yeah, let's see what we have on the HPE side.
Yeah, so I guess the answer to the feasibility is we don't really know until we actually see how difficult the process is. So we'll start with the pilot program, and then based off of that outcome, we'll see if we have to make any adjustments to the time frame.
Right.
I don't know what I'm thinking here. An obvious one in the x86 world for me is IT renew. They may not be ready. No, that doesn't work. They're AMI. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I wasn't thinking.
Did you already reach out to IT Renew, Ron? Or
I haven't talked to them. It's just that, like taking those older nodes like the Winterfell and somehow, making that redistributable. We can ask, but I suspect there's no good way to make that happen. I just wasn't thinking.
okay.
So it seems like actually a lot of these questions might get answered later today during the panel. So HPE as well as IT Renew will be in the panel later today.
Right.
But in terms of the time frame, it sounds like it might be a bit uncertain. It would be, I think we would have to at least get 2 or 3 vendors through the submission process by March. Otherwise, I think it'd be a bit uncomfortable making it a requirement if no one has gone through the process yet.
So is that a requirement though, the submission process, at least a vendor has to go through one submission process before the IC approves this?
Yes, that's, Ron would be more familiar with the incubation committee, but from my understanding is before the incubation committee, the vendor would go through this process and we would make a recommendation. So Ron would make a recommendation to the IC based off of their compliance with the OSF checklist.
Yeah, in other words, there's always this step where a system is proposed and then the IC says, up or down on it. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's also a chance that the IC can veto a decision from OSF. Is that right, Ron?
Say it again.
Oh, can the IC? So suppose the OSF committee says they don't certify a platform. Can the IC approve it anyways?
I don't know. I don't know if that's ever come up. That kind of thing. Yeah.
When is the security approval proposal to IC is going up? The security
in 2021.
Is it 21 or are they taking it this year for the IC approval?
I believe it's 2021.
They said Q1 21, right? Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
So, yeah, so in terms of feasibility, it seems maybe not. We'll see at the vendor panel. We'll start a pilot program and we'll get more information based off of that.
Yeah, let's see if we can get some, but yeah, exactly. I totally agree. I think in the panel session, Ron, if you can actually get somebody to sign up for the pilot program, that will be really, really an excellent start.
Yeah.
Between now and March 21, if we can actually run through this process, at least we validated the flow.
Yep. I think they're going to be. I think we're going to find there are going to be companies that are happy to be, the first 1 or 2 or 3. I think they'll see it as something they want to do. So, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see here. I'm just. Speaking of the devil, I just got some slides from HP, so I'm quick putting him into the panel session. So anyway, that's
All right, so on to the next topic. Challenges faced by silicon vendors, by IBVs, by ODMs. So if you're one of these and you want to bring up a question for OSF that you want answered now, please feel free to add it to the comment section in FN virtual platform, and we'll try our best to answer them. But in the meantime, Ron or Reddy or anyone participating, what challenges do you see are faced by silicon vendors, by IBVs and ODMs right now?
So I can speak on the silicon vendors, right? The good thing about having the binary blobs will help us. The element of, the who really cares for this one, right? So one is the provider. It's essentially, we are part of a specific platform, right? Whatever pieces that we support, like ACM, microcode, FSP blobs, we are all essentially the blobs that are actually part of a specific platform. Now, we need to find out exactly which platform vendors, ODMs and OEMs, that want to actually take this on, do this, and how do they see the value in actually getting the OSF badging as really a good thing for them. That one, I'm still a bit fuzzy. I'm not saying there is no value. And I'm not challenging the status quo. I'm just trying to understand how do they see the value and when do they plan to do this? How fast they want to get onto this bandwagon is something that I'm still, fuzzy.
all right. For silicon vendors, the thing I've observed is the biggest problem, and it's a big range in terms of how big a problem it is. So the first big problem over which there's been a lot of discussion is how many ownership changes they can be if an ownership change is connected to a key change. So that's gone back and forth a lot. And the number 8, I know is very difficult in the x86 world. I think AMD, it's a key on the processor die, and it's only burnable once. And I know I think it's 3 with Intel, I'm not sure. So from the point of view of Google, it's almost a non-issue because we're not going to use any of that infrastructure. We're moving to things like OpenTitan, but I know that for other companies it's tricky. And so that's been a hot item in the meetings, is the key thing. And the other thing, depending on which vendor we're talking to, AMD has said any number of times that as a silicon vendor, they don't want to redistribute the blobs. They want the device the system manufacturer to redistribute the blobs. So they've been pretty forceful on that point. Whereas Intel has been able to get their blobs into GitHub, which has been a real good thing. And then ARM has been able to release trusted firmware architecture as open source, but then you go to different ARM vendors and there seem to be blobs. So the picture from ARM is pretty good, but from the ARM different vendors it's not quite as clean. So that, I'm trying to remember any other issues from the silicon vendors, but I think those are the ones that really stick in my mind.
So back to Reddy's comment about the value of OSF. I suppose that the biggest one is if it becomes a requirement for the OCP badging. That would be a big incentive. But what is actually the intrinsic value of OSF? What value does OSF itself provide to the silicon vendors and to the ODMs and to everyone involved?
Well, the one thing for me, one thing I'm going to say, right now the silicon vendors, they provide a security solution, which are, they're pretty good, but it only takes one mistake and you're open to the world. It only takes one case of accepting a zero-length password in your web server on the ME, for 8 years, and you've got a problem. Whereas where that code open source, you can do the same hardening exercise that's been done on other open source systems. I'm pretty amazed sometimes when I look at what the kind of hardening they've been applying to Linux in the last 5 years, 6 years, and you don't see that many other places. So the silicon vendors have tended to view open sourcing this stuff as really a headache, but I think that there is an upside there in terms of the review of code by, and I'm not saying many eyes. I think that many eyes makes shallow bugs or whatever it is kind of nonsense, because there aren't that many people who are really capable of doing a good security review of code. But if it's just, say, your company as a silicon vendor against the entire world, which is what it is right now, and including, I've been told stories about organized crime organizations that decap chips and look for problems. The resources being applied by quote unquote bad guys are just incredible. So I think at this point it makes a lot more sense for this code to be open source and reviewed by a lot of people rather than only reviewed by one company. Mainly the company that wrote it, especially the company that wrote it. That's a real source for problems. So I think there's huge upside. I think trusted firmware architecture, benefits from being open.
Yeah, I mean, I get the open part, right? Totally. I'm a big fan of open source initiatives across the board, not just the OSF. The point is that if the moment you take the open source, then on top of that, even with binaries, you essentially have certain OSF badging requirements. Now, normally the push is not going to be from the platform vendors. The push on the need for badging has to come from the ones who are actually purchasing those platforms. That includes you guys, Facebook, Amazons of the world, right? Or the next wave CSPs, or the enterprise customers. That's what I wanted to hear on what their opinion and perspective is, that they see this as a value, right? I mean, I totally get the part of, we are all part of supporting that and we are behind it. We are fully on board supporting this one. Just creating the momentum means the customers need to pull for it. Who would that be?
Got it. So I think that I can tell you for companies that I'm in communication with, once I've explained what OSF means, and I had a discussion recently with somebody. Once I went over what OSF really meant, they decided that OSF would be the minimum bar for buying a system in the future. In other words, this company wanted whatever they got. They wanted the absolute bare minimum requirement on firmware, because of all the issues around it, was that it would comply with OSF. And this is not even a company that actually buys OCP hardware, but they look at the OSF standard and they want to see that applied to systems they get. So I actually am beginning to see the OSF standard having impact outside OCP. And so it's going to take a while. It takes education and it takes just the outreach and discussion. But at some point, companies realize that it's hugely in their advantage because they now are able, in a way they couldn't before, to talk to other companies about, problems they're seeing and, and find a way to resolve them. So I went through this once before. It's kind of defining my age, but when we got to the point where companies could talk to each other about bugs in their Linux kernels, once they got over the idea that they were spilling the beans, and they realized it was hugely to their advantage to be able to go to another company and say, what about this driver? We're seeing this, and create that community that we have now in the Linux world around sharing knowledge and sharing bug fixes. I mean, we can make that same argument around OSF, and I think it is happening. So we can suggest to companies that they take OSF and make it in fact, I think I need to be talking to my friends at the DOE labs and just saying, next time you buy, because this comes up, next time you buy one of your petascale machines and it's a cluster, you really ought to just take this, right? Include by reference the OSF version 1.1 spec. They'll totally buy that. I know my friends at Los Alamos would.
I see.
I should add, where that ends up is when you get a request for proposals, you put out a request, you specify the required items in it, and that's one of them.
So a comment from Sri from 9 Elements. So being able to control or having control over the firmware allows folks like us, so 9 Elements Circular Data Center, to create innovative products in new form factors in different markets. So it seems like that's another value that OSF provides, the value of circular economy over the firmware itself. All right, so do you want to go to the next topic now? Particular difficulties in the OSF checklist.
Well, Ryan, did you want to touch on the IBVs?
Oh, the IBVs as well. That's a good point.
Jay is here. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and then since Elaine is here, maybe we wanted to see what how security team is pursuing the badging. If there are customers they have lined up, can we actually partner with them?
Okay. Well, it took us a while to figure out we have essentially 4 levels of badging. And the first level is just that you have done the requirements, so there's, it's just like a badge. You met looking at the specifications for secure boot and attestation and the threat model. You've done, you've done the very first one, which is the threat model, that you have taken your product and you have evaluated, these are the things I have considered as threats, and this is how I have mitigated them. It's meant to be like 3 lines, like I considered physical attacks and I decided not to mitigate them because I expect the customer to put German shepherds around it, or gates, guards, and guns, as we say. So that's the first level. And then there is a bronze level that says you've met with the requirements of attestation. Let me see if I can, well, I don't know if I can present, but that's all right. The document itself has different, there are requirements that says you must do this, and there are others that are recommended that you may do this or you should do this. And so our levels of badging are based on, did you meet the bare minimum? Did you meet the bare minimum attestation and secure boot? Did you do any of the extras like the shoulds or the recommendeds? That gets you a silver badge. And the gold is where you include open firmware. Everything is open. So that's how we have decided to do that, because from a security point of view, open is better.
So Elaine, do you have any, do you have specific set of vendors lined up for the badging?
Not that I know of yet. It just came out like 3 weeks ago. So
Right.
not yet.
Any potential candidates are still trying to figure out? How are you guys pursuing, driving that, enlisting at least a few initial vendors for the badging process?
So there are some within the security project who participate in the project itself, who plan to take their products through the badging process. I don't know the ones right now off the top of my head. I think maybe Broadcom and Chameleon. Not real sure.
I see.
But they participate. They're very active participants in our project already.
So they are on the server side or the switching side?
They are on the device side. So
device. Okay.
Yeah, because we've only done, so in the security group, the security project, we had to document a protocol, right? There are 3 things. One is the threats model that I mentioned. One is the attestation protocol, and that's between a device and a platform, or a device and a server, if you like, or a device and a BMC. And then the other part is secure boot. And attestation by itself is no good unless you have secure boot, because then you can't trust the attestations that come out of the system, because you don't know what it's running. It may be lying to you, right? So you have to have secure boot as your foundation. So the two go together. So when we look at how a device complies, we're focused, we had to start somewhere, and we focused very much on the device side. So if it's a network adapter, I don't know, a storage controller, whatever it is, that's on the device side, what are all the requirements? So that device itself has to secure boot. We're not talking about the platform or the server side yet. We're talking about the device, so that the server can decide, do I want to let you in? Will I hold you in reset until I decide I like you? And so that's where we focused. So the first vendors that would be going under this review would be on the device side. And then, one of the next things we have to do is, what do we do on the platform side? But, so that it's vendors who have those devices.
Okay. We have Jay. How do you see this fitting in with the challenges that you will run into?
I think there are, a number of challenges, and we've been, following what's been going on here with the OSF for at least a year now, or close to a year now. And, for us, it's, there's a couple of challenges. One, of course, is, making sure that we can provide solutions for the system vendors that do comply with the the checklist, and as well as having any uniqueness that they want for their particular implementation to differentiate it from other platforms. But the other piece, we obviously see as a we focus primarily on open source firmware solutions, and really making sure that the system vendors out there are aware of who's all available in the ecosystem to be able to serve their needs to provide firmware solutions. Obviously, some System vendors have their own teams in-house, but other ones that are looking for, outside resources to help develop their firmware. One of the challenges I think exists is how do we make sure that all of the available partners and who are able to provide these services and these solutions are made known to the various system vendors.
Ron, one of the things that we've encountered is that the question is there the demand out there? Because some of the firmware involves proprietary code, licenses that are not friendly for open sourcing, then it represents an investment by the vendor to either rewrite it or go get those licenses changed. And it's not free, right? It costs time and sometimes money. And then it turns into a demand question. Is it worth my time to do that? Is it worth my money to do that? And I don't know what you found. Your mention about the DOE is an interesting one because that could help to drive the demand.
All right, so there's a bunch of comments in the FN virtual platform. I'll just list them out now. So Jean-Marie Verdun says there is demand. Jonathan Zhang says difficulties, extra resource needed for preparing OSF checklist solution. The solution used for production may not be used as a checklist solution as is for multiple reasons. One reason is that silicon vendor blobs used in production may not be used for the redistribution. So a different set of silicon vendor blobs needs to be used to fulfill the checklist requirement. So I guess what Jonathan's hinting at is there's a set of blobs which are redistributable and there's a set of blobs which aren't redistributable. So you have to have essentially kind of a firmware solution prepared specifically for OSF.
Why would that happen?
I suppose it's a restriction imposed by the silicon vendor.
So if they are not redistributable, it's not even a candidate for OSF badging, right?
That is right.
So,
but OSF badging does allow you to use a different, like a different firmware image in production, right? So as long as there is at least one available firmware solution for your platform, which is OSF compliant, then you can still sell your platform with non-OSF compliant solutions, as long as it's still possible to install an OSF compliant solution on your platform.
yeah, I think the tricky part is going to be if a platform, I will just play the devil's advocate, right? If a platform is essentially designed for one silicon vendor and, and if you do not have a redistributable blobs from that silicon vendor, pretty much you can't really do much about it because you can't actually take it through the OSF badging process because until you have multiple vendor solutions for the given platform, you cannot really do that. Right? It really depends on how flexible the platform is, where you can actually mix and match different blobs to get the OSF badging. If one vendor is not supporting, you need to have a choice with the other vendor. But if the board is so restrictive, where you only have one or two vendors, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it makes it easier if those proprietary firmware pieces are separable from the rest of the BIOS, from the rest of the firmware, then it will make it easier to be OSF compliant.
Yeah, because I mean, if you design a board, let's say with the Intel processor on it, you're essentially looking at a specific Intel processor, right? Depending on what processor generation you are talking about, it may not be socket compatible beyond that process generation. Then you are essentially tying that with the PCH, and then same goes with the BMC. So if you're going to do something with ASP 2500, you can't really go change it to 3500 without board redesign, right? So you're kind of logged in anyway in some shape or form for a given platform. And if any one of them are not redistributable, that's when it gets very challenging from a badging process perspective. To me, that is the biggest worry. Right? So the redistributable aspect of all the components in a platform, that's one part. The second part is just the hard fusing aspect that, will be a challenge, especially for certain keys where you're fusing in the platform. That transferring the ownership may not be that easy. So that is the second one I think is going to be a challenge, depending on what platform generation you are talking about, what vendor you are talking about, of course, right? The keying aspect and, the fusing aspect, ownership transfer is the second one.
Yeah, makes sense. So there's one other comment. So this is from, like, the comments come in a 30-second delay. So sorry about that. But if you think at it only money-wise, OSF always pays off. The IBPs out there tend to work on a service-based work and not on a license-based model. The vendors do get a customized firmware for their platform instead of one SDK to rule them all. And I would assume that the vendors want more control over their firmware. So this came from Christian Walter.
Yeah, that's correct, Ryan. So this is Philip from 9elements. So we have multiple customers which are really interested in the open source firmware model, or how we can say here in the open system firmware model, because it leads to lower costs, right? Otherwise, you will have royalty fees and license SDK costs. And this is definitely done with service-based work on the open source code. And even that, we upstream everything. That means we put everything back to the projects, then everyone else can use it, right? So it's the same model as for the Linux kernel. And this is why I think open source firmware is a successor of the closed source firmware development in the long run. The same goes for Linux, right? So in the long run, we will have the same situation, and we're getting also more and more customers demanding it.
Yeah. So Philip, what is your stance though, in terms of binary blobs, which the silicon provider considers protected IP, such as FSB and other components?
So if I'm open to speak, I would say the best would be if everything is open source, right? So, but a lot of SOC vendors tend to have it closed source because they fear if they release a code, this is bad quality, or they disclose some IP stuff in it, which is probably true, but probably also not true, because a lot of stuff which these blobs contain nowadays are not really IP anymore, right? So it's just like not black magic. It's just that they fear that this is probably or leaves any competition open for other SOC vendors where they can see their code. And yeah, I think this is the main reason behind it. I would always recommend to go with fully open source firmware. If we have to use as it is at the moment, different kinds of blobs in the firmware is good, but we should always try to focus to make everything open, especially for security stuff, right? So if we talk about IT security, it should be auditable. And there's also no use in having just one company auditing it. There must be multiple auditors from different companies worldwide. And therefore, for example, security technology should always be open source, right? This is a really important thing. And also that depends on us, as already said, that depends on the ownership model, right? So ownership model itself is a really important topic in an OSF and OCP, because the companies try to decommission their hardware, and if they can't for example, revoke keys fused into from the system and let it open for reprovisioning by another vendor, they can't sell the hardware anymore. And so also a lot of companies tend to be interested in solutions which are not enforcing security at all. I mean, there's a security working group recommendations, which I read through, and they are also fine, but a lot of technologies based on enforcing mechanisms, which is, in my opinion, not the best way. There are different kinds of security technologies which can be used in order to make it possible for decommissioning. So this is definitely also an important topic. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I a little bit moved in a different direction. So, but yeah.
So Philip, let me ask you this question though. From an IBV perspective, let's say you spend, X amount of time to take a specific platform, drive through the OSF badging process. I don't know exactly how long it takes, what's the investment needed and all that stuff. Let's say if you guys do that, what is the return on investment expectation from that work? Because it's not, like you said, it's not a licensing model that, if you were to just use the service model, how would you see that benefiting you guys? And not to put you and Jay on spot, but I'm just curious on how you see the value. And investment needed without any, from your company to get through the badging process. And after that, how do you essentially get into, how does it benefit you?
So, so it's not benefiting in to be honest, there are benefits for our customers, right? So that benefits us in that way as well. If they use open source firmware or decide on go full open source with their platform, or what you can do at the moment, having blocks plus open source firmware, they can reduce costs because the development time is definitely reduced in a service-based model. That means you have probably 2 weeks you can bring up already hardware for a customer. Probably takes a few more weeks to fix everything, but overall, if you have or we're working on, for example, you have a specific new SOC vendor platform coming out, then the initial work is always a little bit higher. But in the long run, you can easily support multiple customers in a short, so let's say for low cost and in a short amount of time, because if you have done the work once, you can upstream it, it's back in the project, and you can base on that for different other customers the work. And this is a great way how the customers are quite happy, because this reduces cost. And this is what we got as feedback from multiple parties there. And so also the open source testing is quite interesting, because they, for sure, a lot of hardware vendors test in-house, but testing in-house is always just testing stuff if that works in-house. And if you work with upstream community, you have to have at least open source testing with the upstream community as well, because there may be bugs which are brought in by other companies. This is, let's say, the bad side of open source, you could say. I wouldn't say this is bad at all, but if there are coming in new features by other persons or whatever, then it can be that the systems are not running with a different source code version anymore. So you have to run tests on that automated test to make sure the upstream, you're back upstream, and you can run it on the platform again. And so this is let's say a small hurdle at the moment, but this is also fine for our customers. So they just paid us for doing that. So we are fine doing that, and the costs are also not really that high. If you have automated testing, we can find easy bugs on that and so on. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, excellent. Actually, I mean, I think you answered the question. So you're basically saying the investing upfront in delivering a quality firmware solution through the testing framework reduces the initial burden The second thing is there is an expectation from the customer on the quality that they are getting into when you have the OSF badging process. And then the third one, I don't know if you alluded to this one, is, it's not just one customer you're catering to. There will be multiple, customers that see the value and you get the scale out of it, right? Seems
Yeah,
like that's the
completely
other
agree.
angle, right? So the quality and the scale, yeah, got it.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say I support exactly what you're saying there, and I agree a lot with what Philip put in there too. So we're on the same page.
Nice.
I've got a question too about the requirements. So forgive me for making everything sound like security, but in the security world, if you go through some sort of certification, whether it's FIPS or common criteria, whatever it is that you choose, first of all, there are different levels. You might have like a smart card might be certified to FIPS level 2 or 3. Then the one thing we find is that having a certification isn't only a marketing stamp, right? It's also, it becomes over time table stakes, that it becomes a requirement by the customers that says you must have, FIPS 140-3 level 2. So are you envisioning the OSF badges to become table stakes, or is it just marketing?
Table stakes.
So I think right now we only have one OSF badge, so we don't quite have levels at all, and that's one of the questions in this discussion list. So currently there was some discussion about having different levels of OSF, like gold, platinum, bronze, or something like that. But currently there's one level, and the only real value in it right now is if we make it a requirement for OCP certification. Ron might have a different take on this, though.
Well, I don't know how to say. I mean, I think the theory here is over time things get more open. Does that sound fair? Our goal, Ryan or someone?
Yep, I'd agree with that.
And
we had to make compromises in the first version of the spec, and hopefully we could refine them in the future.
Yeah, but so my experience with all this was that things were almost unbelievably open in up until about 2003, and then, I mean, you could literally go to the various websites at the various vendors and get. I mean, the first board I did, L440GX, the chipset docs from Intel were almost a tutorial in how to write a BIOS, or in everything you need to know, right? But there's definitely a very noticeable push over time that never seems to back off toward locking down information. So I think one of the goals here is that there's an incentive of some sort to not do that. And that's why, if I understood the questions correctly, that's kind of why we had the idea of levels. You see what I mean? Or
Yeah, I guess that if the case of in order to get, say, a server certified, to get approval by OCP for your server, you also have to have an OSF badge.
Yeah.
Then in that environment it becomes table stakes, right? You just can't get it, but it's a requirement.
I forgot what table stakes meant.
Oh, to play poker, you know, you got to put up at least, you know, you can't even come to the table without.
Got it. Okay, I forgot.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah, no, it's table stakes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You must be this tall to enter the building.
Yes.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can't meet these minimum, these are pretty minimum requirements actually. These are extremely minimum, but you know, especially given where we were 20 years ago and where we are today, where 20 years ago, nothing about OSF would, like all the requirements we have in OSF today, we trivially met 20 years ago. So it's almost, the fact that we're even doing this is a measure of just how messed up the whole business is, to be honest, except for IBM. So, you know, it'd be nice in 10 years to say that we're back where we were 30 years ago.
Oh, that's sad.
No, it is sad. It's very sad, but you know, it's where we are. And I'm not assuming it'll move fast, but I do like the idea of rewarding companies that go above and beyond the bare minimum. No, that sounds like Office Space now.
Yeah, we
The
found that too.
badges are there.
Yeah, that we found too that we were getting pretty doggone strict about, oh, you must do this, you must do that, and we had some pushback, of course. So we had to sort of not weaken, but we had to change where we distinguish between you must and you should. And,
yeah.
you know, the should becomes our direction for the future, that we really want you to do this, but we understand this is the state of the world now. So,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
The one thing I know from every supercomputer buy we ever did at DOE, and there's a lot of people more experienced than me, but optional meant you're never going to do it. So there's requirements and then things you'd like to see happen, and just forget it. You'll never get the things that you say you'd like to have, period. So table stakes.
The minimum.
Yeah, I think it's so. This is Philip from 9 Elements again. So I think it's really important to raise the hurdle a bit. So as Ron said, if we don't say it's table stakes, then no one is going to do it. So keeping status quo is, in my opinion, not the thing. We should focus on. We should try to move forward and get into a direction where we at least have some minimum requirements fulfilled. Right, and for sure, I can understand that in order to get people more easily onboarded on that stuff, that probably there should be some lower level allowing people or getting rewards in any way, whatever, so they're motivated to do that. Right.
Yeah.
We just want to move into the modern software world from 30 or 40 years ago. So it didn't change so much. For sure, with open source firmware, but as we said, it's really, we are stuck for a lot of systems for a long time, and this is, I think, not the way to go anymore.
Oh, time to finish up. All right. Well, are we done?
I think we're about done. We'll just go over the call to action. So this is actually very similar to what you would get from an OSF call. So if you're interested in learning more about OSF and you enjoyed this, then go to his calendar, look at the OSF calls. Likely the next one would be canceled because of Thanksgiving. So perhaps the one after that in about a month from now. Also, do fill out this questionnaire. That will help us determine if we want to have an OSF call in a Asia Pacific time zone, and we open up the community to more people. And that's about it. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being here.